We've done several interviews about dangers Canadians can face crossing the border into the United States. But how much danger might Canadians be once they've made it into the country? I'm going to be talking to Loren Locke, who's a U.S. immigration lawyer in Georgia, and she says that risk has increased under the administration of Donald Trump. So, welcome to the interview, Loren.
Thank you.
So, my understanding is that there haven't been a lot of new policies, new regulations, new rules passed, but the Trump administration has given direction to the Immigration Department to much more vigorously enforce the rules that are in place. Is that correct?
Yes, both instructions and new resources to do so. So that is correlating with more scrutiny against all kinds of legal and illegal immigrants and visitors from outside the U.S.
We were off camera. We were talking about a few examples. For instance, when a border guard or you're asked, "Are you going to be working in the U.S.?" and you say, "Well, no, I'm going to Disneyland, but I might take a few phone calls, business calls on my cell," and that's not allowed, correct?
Yeah, so visiting as a business visitor is allowed, but there are really strict rules and they're kind of gray about how much work you can do, where the income can be from, what's the purpose of the work. In short, the rules were designed before working from your phone while you're on an overseas vacation was a thing. Now it is a thing, and it's something that if you do get questioned about, got to be really careful because you could easily make it look as if you are working from the United States without work authorization, even if your income is completely outside of the United States.
What would happen, just hypothetically, if that came up? Would they? I mean, obviously, they could be barred from entering the country if
Mhm.
but what else? What happens when they're inside the country and they might run into, I don't know, police officer or someone else in authority, and they get asked that question? What might the consequences then be?
Typically, if a Canadian's going to run into some sort of border enforcement inside the US, it's going to come from some sort of police interaction, like a traffic stop. Obviously, all the police officers in the United States do not understand the nuances of US immigration law. If they realize that a person is not a US citizen or lawful permanent resident and they're getting arrested anyway, it shouldn't lead to an arrest just because it shouldn't normally lead to some big inquiry into what you're doing. And if you're getting pulled over for speeding, they're not going to be asking you about do you take work calls on your phone during your vacation.
Gotcha.
Um, if you did something that you're going to get arrested for anyway, um, then you could get yourself on that whole path to detention and removal. Um, I would say if you get admitted and you've either not been questioned or you've answered successfully, it's unlikely that you're going to face scrutiny about what is the nature of your activities here unless you're getting in some sort of criminal trouble during your trip.
Now, this area that I mentioned before that's being tightened up. Uh, can you give my audience some tips on things they really should be careful of when they're, say, crossing the border and they get asked these questions by the border guards?
Yes. If you get asked questions, you should prepare that you will be asked questions, even though the chance still might be very low. And you should consider the purpose of your trip and whether you have the right authorization to do it. And what is the general plan of your trip? It should be something that you're ready to articulate to say, yes, I'm going to stay with my cousin in Texas for 2 weeks. I'm going to fly home. I already bought my ticket home. That's very clear. If you get questioned more about the nature of your activities or who you're going to be with, you got to make sure you can articulate reasons that are consistent with what you're allowed to do as a visitor. So you're not going to work even in exchange for housing or some other sort of non-cash payment. Working is not allowed. That includes babysitting. That includes helping on a farm. That includes, even house sitting, something like that, that may have been really easily passed under the radar before. That's something you need to be really careful about to show that your purpose of travel is squarely within the parameters. Um,
I have friends who host it, for example, and they go to Europe quite often, but sometimes they'll go to the United States. So it could be deemed by the border guard that in fact the being able to stay in someone's house is a benefit, and therefore it so it might take a job away from an American house sitter, let's say, and then they could be denied or hassled at the border. Is that the case?
yeah, this is one of these areas that's gray. So taking care of somebody's home, not for money, but because you're in some sharing group that does it, is not defined in the immigration law as either clearly allowed or not allowed. That means that you're not always going to have a consistent result. I would feel nervous telling a border officer that that was my plan, because staying in someone's house in exchange for taking care of the house looks a lot like work for reward, work for payment. Um, Even though if you did it on a casual basis, um, it does not necessarily work, but it could really depend on who's grilling you and how much they want to say no versus they want to let it slide.
Um, you used to be a consular officer, and you used to deal with folks, immigrants or visitors a lot. And you mentioned that what that person, what a traveler might say to the officer is more important than the paperwork they have. Could you explain that?
Yes, absolutely. So a visa officer or border officer does not have time to dig through your entire history or to look at all the paperwork that you thought might be useful. It can make you feel confident to have the paperwork. It can make you feel prepared. It can help you if you need to reference something in it. Um, but it's not their job to look at it, and they're not going to need to go through it to make a decision. You have to be prepared to interact and in the conversation convey the information that gives them the confidence that you are going to follow the rules. You understand the rules, and what you're going to do falls within what you're allowed to do. Um, it is much more important how you present yourself than what your papers say.
Now, you also mentioned we talked earlier about how Canadian travel to the U.S. is down, which then means fewer visitors and more staff at the border because the border service is hiring. Does that mean that, there are simply people, border guards have more time and therefore are more likely to be, more thorough when they're questioning Canadians?
It could mean that, yes. Just because they have more staff and less work doesn't mean everyone's going to feel like working harder. But I do think that a lot of uh, the Department of Homeland Security is, they understand there's scrutiny on them. They understand the new marching orders. They want to have results. They want to um, do what they're supposed, the metrics of success. And I would never say that the metrics of success are, how many people you deny each day. That was never true adjudicating visas, but you want to have something to show for all the resources that you're throwing at it.
And that would include, questioning more
Yeah,
people
yeah, that
more thoroughly.
that you used the resources and the people that you had available to be thorough to the extent that you could, and that in your thorough review, you found some troubling situations that you were able to intervene and stop. You were able to deny entry to some people who weren't coming for the right reasons. You were able to root out some people that had hostile attitudes toward the United States. I know a lot of Canadians are very worried, as you've probably seen, that the United States has this new push to scrutinize the students and the exchange visitors. So those are the F1 and the J1, M1 visas. Um, that cable that came out and went into effect late June means these consular officers are supposed to be digging through your online presence. That's something that a border officer can do too. So they can look you up if they wanted to, or they can just ask you for your phone and dig through it and see what they see. They can check who you're interacting with in your personal messages. They can check your social media. They can dig around. And if you say no, then they can refuse you admission.
So
So
is it still fair to say, like, if you had any tips to provide to Canadians who are thinking about going to the US, what would be the things that, what tips might you provide them?
I would say you don't want to appear that you're being secretive, but you need to consider what you're handing over. You need to consider what sort of access you're granting and what's going to be on there. You have the right to keep your social media private. You have the right to delete whatever you want off of it. You have the right not to proactively present anything that you think is going to make you look bad. Um, you know, Proactively sharing information that is going to show that you are politically active in ways that wouldn't please the Trump administration is not going to help you. Um, but you also don't need to make that part of your request. You're not giving your life story when you're presenting yourself for admission and stating the purpose of your trip.
Great. Well, Lauren, thank you very much for this. Really appreciate it.
It's been a pleasure.